meeting. Nice to meet you all. My name is Amy Norgren-Salfi. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Excel Technologies, which is a woman-owned small business, and I'm serving as the industry chair for the Climate Community of Interest. I am joined by our government chair, who's going to wave to you, Vera Ashworth, Deputy CIO at GSA. But
GAO.
Oh, I'm sorry, GAO. I wrote just yes, GAO. Important to know she's working with us here in her personal capacity, however, as this is not part of her day job, but has experience working at EPA and a lifelong passion for these issues. So, hello, Vera. And this summer, the Climate COI graduated from being a working group, which was conducting a few research projects within the Innovation Institute at ACT-IAC, to being an actual community of interest. So now we have a mission statement, which is to leverage the strength and expertise of the ACT-IAC community to share and communicate climate change research and programs across the federal community, develop tools and resources to support the federal acquisition and contractor community, and support collaboration and knowledge sharing between government, industry, and academia. And one of our primary objectives is to foster a federal acquisition framework that advances sustainability in a manner that is practical and feasible. And with that objective in mind, we offer you today's session on catalyzing sustainable procurement, led by government acquisition experts. A bit of administrative trivia. You may post questions in the chat or hold them until our speakers are done with their presentation. Give them some time to do this wonderful presentation. And I want to turn over things to Polly and Gissa. They'll be introducing today's invited speakers. Polly is the Senior Advisor to the Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Homeland Security and is the Government Chair for this Acquisition and Climate Working Group. Gissa, the industry lead for this working group, is a director at SAIC. So over to you all.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much, Amy. Again, my name is Gissa Sateri with SAIC. My daytime job is to manage our GSA account, not GAO, GSA. And I have the privilege of serving as the industry chair for the acquisition project under the COI, as Amy mentioned. Our speakers today are from the EPA and the Environmentally Preferable Purchasing Program, which we'll refer to as EPP. And they'll share some new FAR updates and resources designed to help agencies with sustainable procurement in the federal government. With that, let me introduce our speakers today. Jenna Larkin serves as a member of the EPP program at the EPA Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. She's a key leader in implementing the sustainable purchasing requirements and goals across the federal government and manages one of the key tools for doing so. Jenna also serves as the lead for implementing other federal sustainability goals related to sustainable products, such as identifying products that do not contain PFAS or help to reduce single-use plastics. Jenna received dual master's degrees in environmental science and public affairs from Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs. And then we also have Jonathan Rifkin, serves as the EPA specialist for the EPP program in the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. With over 20 years of experience in environmental programs and policy, he supports the federal acquisition community in navigating the regulatory environment so agencies can identify and procure environmentally sustainable products and services. Jonathan received his master's degree in public administration from the University of Delaware. And moderating our session and running through the Q&As is obviously our none other than Polly Hall. As Amy mentioned, she's a senior advisor within the DHS Chief Procurement Office. And additionally, she serves as our acquisition project government chair. So with that, I will turn it over to, hold on one sec here. Okay, I'll turn it over to Polly. You want to kick it off?
I'm not going to take much time. I just wanted to say thank you for everyone for joining today, and most especially to Jonathan and Jenna, who are going to share a little bit about the FAR updates and then the EPP program and how they relate very directly to the new updates in the federal acquisition regulation. And I am excited for this conversation. I'll be monitoring the chat along with others here for you. But without further ado, I think, Jonathan, you're going to kick it off, right?
Sure am.
Awesome. Over to you. Thank you so much for being with us
Thank
today.
you so much. Absolutely. I'm glad to be. It sounds like this is one of the first of these meetings where we're really, really delighted to be one of the speakers as you guys kick off. So, all right. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. If you wouldn't mind, next slide. Thank you. So let me just walk you through our agenda. It's going to be pretty basic. I'll start with an overview of recent updates to the sustainable procurement sections of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR. And Jenna will follow up with an overview of the EPA's recommendations of specification standards and eco-labels for federal purchasing, which we can call the recommendation. It's a mouthful otherwise. And we will, of course, use the balance of our time for Q&A and look forward to that for sure. So next slide, please. All right. So this is a slide that really just kind of sets the table for our conversation. This is a press release, and I'm not going to read it word for word for you, but the basic idea here is that these new rules under the Federal Acquisition Regulations are instructing purchasers to pursue a host of environmental priorities, and in doing so, utilize some key EPA purchasing programs, things like for water efficient products, WaterSense, and for the Safer Choice program for products that use safer chemicals, and of course, the EPA recommendations. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through what those requirements are by virtue of the FAR. And though we don't have representatives from all of those programs, Jenna will dive in a little deeper into what the EPA recommendations are. So I'll tell you what the requirements are. And in this case, Jenna will be able to talk a little bit more about what one of those required programs is telling everyone to do. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about background regarding the FAR. So just looking at this slide over to the far right, you can see that you might very reasonably deduce that FAR case 2022-06, which is the vehicle by which FAR language ultimately becomes official language, took about a year to put into place. Proposed in August of 2023, effective in May of 2024, which is really not that long ago at all. But in fact, this process has been in play for almost a decade, maybe a little bit more. Typically, when we're trying to identify what our sustainable purchasing policies are, we look to things like executive orders. We look to the FAR, of course, that's a key thing we look to. But as we know, executive orders come and go with administrations, and FAR language, if left alone too long, can become stale. And so we were especially delighted to be able to finalize this language in the FAR, not only because it is characterized by really relevant directives such as Executive Order 14057, which is catalyzing clean energy industries and jobs through federal sustainability, as well as OMB Memo M2206, which is guidance on purchasing sustainable products and services, but also because it now being in the FAR, it gives federal purchasers the consistency that helps them to do their jobs well, and the permanence that comes with the FAR. And so even though we may have to, over time, we'll probably be back and do another FAR case in a few years, we're quite happy to see where we land today. So with that, let me tell you about a little bit more about the FAR itself. Next slide, please. And we'll dive deeper into some of the specific language, particularly under FAR 23.1, which is where a lot of these sustainable purchasing requirements reside. You will have access to this PDF, I believe. And if so, in addition to at the end of the slide, there's going to be a lot of good links for you. This is a link that will take you to essentially an overview of exactly what I'm going to say. So, and then some. So, great resource. But let's dive in. Next slide, please. All right, great. So this slide is good for anybody who just wants that bird's eye view of what the new FAR language is telling us. I hope that this is something you can keep in your back pocket and reference if you ever really needed to just quickly understand what's included. But to make it as easily digestible as possible, what we did was we broke up some of those key components into three basic buckets. First, there will be language that streamlined FAR Part 23, which is that area that focuses on sustainable procurement, language that strengthened sustainability requirements, and language that really took key roles like the contracting officer and the contractor and elevated the role of sustainability in terms of what they do day to day and made them more accountable to making sure that those requirements are met. So over the course of the next 10 minutes, we're going to drill down into a few of these points in a little bit greater detail. But for now, I'm just going to kind of walk through them at a high level to just give you a sense of what's included here. So under this first grouping of streamlined language that streamline the FAR, there's a new definition of what sustainable products and services are. And that's going to help our stakeholders to better understand how to identify what sustainable products and services are. It's helpful if that's what you're trying to go ahead and buy. There's also a new sustainable omnibus clause at 52223-23. And what it does is it groups together some of the key sustainable purchasing programs that are now a requirement towards what you're going to try to purchase. And this clause, which references those programs, needs to be prescribed in all applicable contracts. And then last under this is really just housekeeping. We moved a lot of non-environmental matters out of this section, placed them in different FAR parts. And now all sustainability requirements, specifically the ones I mentioned, reside in a single place, making it a bit easier to navigate. Under this second bullet or bucket of items that strengthen sustainability requirements, there's language that establishes the purchase of sustainable products and services as the government's default position, and that's to the maximum extent practical. So really, it's just a new and more aggressive posture that is basically saying this is what you're going to do unless stated otherwise. There's language which states that sustainable product and services requirements are applicable to all service contracts where products are delivered or used in performance of that contract. And this is really just emphasizing the idea that this is not just about products. This is also about services, especially when sustainable products are used in the context of that contract. And then lastly, on this grouping, it's just broadly applicable. It's applicable to all commercial procurements, regardless of dollar threshold, including micro purchases, again, unless indicated otherwise. And then in that last bucket, there's language that really takes great advantage of the CO role. And what it does is it says that they have to ensure that sustainable products and services are identified in requirements documents. There's also language that from the omnibus clause, which requires that the contractor deliver or use sustainable products and services when they're in the award and performance of the contract. And that last bullet is really an extension of the first, which is just saying that primes need to make sure that these requirements, when they're in the award, flow down to their subs. So in a very quick nutshell, those are some of the key takeaways. But like I said, now I'd like to go ahead and drill down into just a few of these over the next 10 minutes or so. So go ahead, there you go. Thank you so much. All right, so first, there's a new definition for what a sustainable product and service is in the FAR. It's available if you were in the FAR under FAR 2.101. And it's broken down into two basic groups: statutory purchasing preference programs and EPA purchasing preference programs. Those who have worked in the FAR, many of these should be familiar, but especially the statutory purchasing preference programs. They existed previously and will continue to exist. And they include products containing recovered materials designated under the comprehensive procurement guidelines. They include bio-based products that meet content requirements under the bio-preferred program, energy efficient products that fall under the Energy Star or FEMP programs, and acceptable chemicals, products, and manufacturing processes that are under the SNAP program. This new revision explicitly included the three EPA purchasing programs mentioned before. They might have been referenced in passing, but this really does take a step further, explicitly requires that these are part of that definition and therefore part of the requirement to purchase sustainable products and services. And they include water efficient products under the Water Sense program, safer choice certified products that contain safer chemical ingredients, and the EPA recommendations, which Jen is going to talk to you about in greater detail. But one minor but important point to note about the EPA recommendations is that the FAR has language which date stamps when products and services that fall under the recommendations would be applicable. In this case, right now, that date stamp says that one would use the EPA recommendations as it was on the date of October 2023, but that date will be updated periodically as updates are made, and that will be done through a public and open process. All right, so with that, maybe we can jump to the next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so jump back one, please. You skipped no, the other direction. There you go, right here, perfect. Thank you so much. Wait, we jumped out again. There you go. All right. You really want to hear that next slide, don't you? So, well, we'll get there though. So all right. So this is language that demonstrates how one strengthens sustainability requirements. And what it states is that agencies are required to procure sustainable products and services to the maximum extent practicable. This is in place of a previous requirement that said agencies had to meet a 95% target. Well, now it's just taking a more aggressive stance and saying, this is what you're going to do, unless, of course, there are exceptions, exemptions, or written justifications for practicability. And practicability is defined as products that meet reasonable performance requirements, can be competed within a reasonable performance schedule, and purchased at a reasonable price. Next slide, please. There you go. Thank you. This language states that COs have to ensure the inclusion of the omnibus clause. That's the one I mentioned previously that speaks to a lot of these different programs and requirements. And it requires that the contractor deliver or use, it also requires that the contractor deliver or use sustainable products and services identified in the award and performance of the contract. And the reason why this particular addition is so important is because this language has to be included in all applicable contracts. And by inclusion in the contract itself as a clause, it is now enforceable with the full force and effect of that contract. So it's really just another example of the federal government stating its seriousness and its intention to make sure that people follow through on this. Next slide, please. All right, so this speaks to, as I was from that first slide, some of the ways in which roles have been more fully leveraged to promote sustainable procurement. We were just talking about one where the CO had to make sure that that omnibus clause is included. Well, this states that the CO has to identify sustainable products and services in the solicitation and the contract that are applicable to the acquisition as identified in the requiring activity. And that is really important because it's elevating the role of sustainability for the contracting officer, but the FAR goes a step further because it also includes conforming language that represents a lot of the things we just talked about. In FAR Part 10, which is development of sustainable considerations into market research, as well as FAR Part 11, which is the addition of sustainable considerations into acquisition plans. And the reason why this is really important is because it's ensuring that all the various stakeholders who are trying to move an acquisition from start to finish are all reading off of the same playbook, that they all understand the requirements that are in play. And that goes a long way in terms of just getting everyone to move more efficiently in the same direction. Next slide, please. So this just includes a few points that are worth noting, I think, but maybe didn't fall perfectly into any of the buckets I mentioned. And the first is that this new language provides guidance on prioritizing sustainable products and services. And what it states is that contracting officers have to prioritize the purchase of multi-attribute statutory programs. So what it's saying is you need to first and foremost pursue use of products or services that fall under these statutory programs, but they want you to choose statutory programs that are also compliant with one or more required EPA purchasing programs, like the Safer Choice, Water Sense, or the EPA recommendations. So hopefully maximizing the overlap there. There's also language that expands reasonable price guidance to all purchases. Basically, this was something that was more typically applied and consistently applied to energy consuming products. You do a cost analysis to determine that if it made sense to buy a product over its full life because it cost less money, because maybe it used less energy, then one should go ahead and do so. It takes that wisdom and is just being more clear about applying it across the board. And then lastly, on this slide, several previous standalone clauses were consolidated under the omnibus clause. And clauses that are being consolidated include those that reference use of EP products, which is probably of interest to people in this group, energy efficient products, and the affirmative procurement of EPA designated items. And just to drive home that point, and none of these clauses removal is because the purchasers no longer have to pursue the intent of those clauses. This is just removing redundancy. In this case, just to call out EP, purchasers still are required to procure EP registered electronics products. It's just they remove the clause because it was duplicative because EPEAT is a part of the EPA recommendations, which is now a requirement as defined through, as already stated under the EPA recommendations. So important point to note. Next slide, please. All right, and then lastly, though many very important improvements have been made, there are still exceptions, exemptions, and justifications. Contracting officers still need to include that omnibus clause unless the entirety of the contract is covered by a written justification for practicability. And we talked about what that was a little earlier. If there's an authorized exception under 23105, so perhaps it's a procurement for weapon systems or something that's being purchased outside of the continental United States, or exemptions under 23106. So for example, products that might be being purchased under an intelligence activity. So those still exist. And then this last bullet states that the contracting author has to identify in the solicitation any product and services that are not subject to the omnibus clause with written justification, exception, or exemption. And really what this is saying is that even on a line item level, if there are instances in which a product is exempt, excepted, or there's a written justification for practicability, that needs to be documented as well. So I think that might be my last slide. I'm gonna, can you next slide, please? Yes. So with that, I'm gonna hand this on over to Jenna. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So as Jonathan mentioned, I'm going to spend some time just diving a bit deeper into one of the required tools to be used in the federal government now that the FAR has been updated. So that's what we call our recommendations of specifications, standards, and ecolabels for federal purchasing. We've already been throwing some of these terms at you today, so I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page of, what they mean. So when we say standards and ecolabels, standards can also be known as environmental performance standards. That is the specific type of standard that our program relies on to help purchasers find more sustainable products and services. So essentially, the standard is what sets the specific levels of performance that must be met to claim that a product is more environmentally friendly. And these standards are made in lots of different ways, but often made by the private sector using multi-stakeholder balance group to come together and figure out what the different criteria should be by product category. And then the eco label might be what most people are familiar with. It's the actual mark placed on the product. You can often see it on the packaging, or maybe when you're shopping online, that's where you see these labels pop up. But essentially, they're meant to be an easy button for purchasers or even general consumers to know that that product meets the set criteria within the standard, which means it's an environmentally preferable product. Next slide. So Jonathan mentioned this a little bit. The difference between a single attribute standard and a multi-attribute standard. And this is important because not only the EPP program do we push for the use of multi-attribute standards and ecolabels, but this administration has also pushed us towards using multi-attribute standards and ecolabels. As you can see, it's pretty clear on the slide, multi-attribute standards have the ability to address many different environmental and human health issues across the entire life cycle of a product or service category, all at the same time. So the product that you buy could have less chemicals of concern, could have less plastics, it addresses recycling issues. Really, any and all environmental or human health issues could be addressed just within that one standard. Versus the single attribute approach, which gets a little difficult for purchasers to start and stack these on top of each other. They typically just address one environmental issue in one life cycle stage, for example, recycled content. And that might not even be the most pertinent environmental issue that should be addressed in that category, which is why we always recommend the use of multi-attribute to make sure that those important issues are being addressed. Next slide. So Jonathan quickly mentioned the executive order, which is what sparked the FAR to be updated, but there is lots of different sustainability elements in this executive order. Also, a federal sustainability plan was issued around the same time, and an OMB memo 22-06. So I just pulled out some of the main sustainability elements that are in these directives that our program is helping to implement each and every one of these. So we have a goal of net zero emissions procurement by 2050. The federal government is directed to prioritize products that can be reused, refurbished, or recycled, prioritize products and services that address multiple environmental impacts, as I already mentioned. We should be pushing towards buying products that don't contain PFAS, that phase out the use of single-use plastics. And then that bottom right box is what we've really been focusing on today, is that ensuring compliance with those statutory mandates, and then to the maximum extent practical using the other EPA purchasing programs. Next slide. So this really just reiterates what Jonathan has said, but using all the labels here, sometimes it's better to visualize that way. So what the executive order and the FAR does is breaks it down into these two buckets. We have our statutory purchasing preference programs, which are the ones that are required. As you can see, these are mostly single attribute standards and eco-labels. We have CPG that addresses just recycled content. BioPreferred addresses bio-based content. We have a SNAP program that addresses ozone depleting substances. Energy SAR is energy efficiency, and then FEMP is also energy and water efficiency. And then to the maximum extent practical, use these other EPA programs that can kind of start to fill in the gaps. So EPA's Water Sense program, EPA's Safer Choice program, and then last but not least, the one on the bottom right is our recommendations of specification standards and eco-labels. And the focus here is really on the use of private sector owned and managed eco-labels within US federal procurement to meet our sustainability goals. Next slide. Okay, so you're probably wondering how we put these recommendations together. So we take that very complex, very confusing global marketplace of eco-labels that are out there. There's over 460 plus of these out there in the market today. I'm sure all of you go to the grocery store or go shopping online and you're overwhelmed by eco-labels. You don't know what issues they're addressing. Are they greenwashing? Is this a trustworthy label? So that's where EPA's EPP program comes into play. We try and clarify this marketplace for our federal purchasers. So there's currently two ways you can get added to our list. One is if the label is already being used by another federal agency, we're able to adopt it that way. Or our main tool is by assessing these labels against what we call our framework for environmental performance standards and eco-labels. Once they pass either one of those assessment procedures, then they can get added to our list. So currently, we are covering 34 different product and service categories and recommending over 40 private sector standards and eco-labels throughout these categories. Next slide. So here's just a screenshot of what our recommendations look like on our website. We launched this new format earlier this year, and we really love it and really think it's a way better way to sort and search for these eco-labels by product category. So there's lots of different filters you can use. If you click on the info button on the right-hand side, it gives you so much additional information. Like you can go read the standard, you can go find their product registry to start browsing for products, and lots of other notes and stuff specific to the standard. And then what we're really excited about is to launch these new attribute filters. You see on the screen right now, we have one for plastics and one for PFAS. So if you click those filters on, a new column will show up and you can see exactly how that standard is addressing that issue. So purchasers can start to compare labels against each other and be like, okay, this one is restricting PFAS in their products, but this one is not. So maybe I'll specify this one in my contract instead. And we hope to launch more filters in the future, just so people can start to realize like how many different sustainability issues standards can help you address. Next slide. And I'm not going to dive in too deep to what our framework is and the different criteria, but essentially we put these private sector standards and eco-labels through the ringer. We assess them across 4 different sections: how the standard was developed, are they addressing the most important environmental and human health issues, do they have a competent conformity assessment program, and then how are they managing this eco-label on the shelves. Standards can respond to anywhere from around 10 of these criteria to 50 plus of these criteria, and it's a mixture of baseline and leadership criteria that we ask for. Next slide. And then here's the current product categories that we're covering. They span anywhere from cafeteria supplies. We have a lot of different construction materials, and then we do cover a lot of electronics and the associated services contracts that go with electronics. And as Jonathan mentioned, we do recommend the EPEAT label in many of these categories. Next slide. We are currently going through an expansion process right now that began back in 2022. We announced that we wanted to assess additional eco-labels in these 4 product categories that you see on the screen. So standard and eco-label organizations did have to volunteer to be assessed by our program and assessed against the framework. And we are at the very end of this expansion process and hopefully announcing very soon and publishing on our website the additional eco-labels that can be used in these 4 product categories. We did publish a Federal Register notice announcing the proposed eco-labels that we'd like to add, and that closed on October 15th, and we're currently going through the public comments and hopefully publishing soon. Okay, and lastly, our job is not over after we create these recommendations. What's really important is for us to then implement these things into all of the federal government's most important purchasing tools and contracts. So we do this in lots of different ways. We engage with GSA very closely in updating some of their procurement tools. So some big ones are the SF Tool Product Search, the Green Procurement Compilation, GSA Advantage, and then we are also able to purchase items from other commercial platforms like Amazon Business and Fisher Scientific, and we've actually recently expanded the options that purchasers can use. So we're engaging with those platforms as best as possible to get these eco-labels incorporated into their tools and make it easier for purchasers to find the more sustainable products. And then just participating in helping contracts get updated as well is really important to us. We had an initiative called Sustainability Check, which was aimed to identify, review, and ensure that the sustainable purchasing requirements were incorporated into some of the largest government-wide contracts, also known as best-in-class contracts. So that was a really successful initiative for us, and we were able to confirm that sustainable purchasing requirements are incorporated into all of these contracts now. And then another example of us participating in updating contracts is just this past year, we collaborated with GSA to update the National Custodial Specification or contract, which is used to, we buy our cleaning products through this contract and used to clean all federal-owned buildings. So now with the update, we have ensured that all of the cleaning products being used to clean our buildings do not contain PFAS. So we are really excited about that update as well. And next slide. Yeah, I think this is just when you receive these slides, all the different resources that we've talked about today, you can dive in to whichever ones are useful to you. I think the next slide has our contact information, but we're also happy to answer some questions now too.
First of all, Jonathan and Jenna, thank you so much. So much great content and shared so succinctly with great visuals so that it was easy to understand. And I did just upload the slides so that folks do have those resources because we've got folks already online asking for where they are. So we'll point them to the right place there. I do want to open the floor if there's anybody with any questions or thoughts to share about today's presentation and content. Give folks a moment. I'm looking. Pete, if you'd like to start us off, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Jenna and Jonathan, awesome stuff. I'm a kind of a techie dude. I help on the COI with one of our working groups in addition to like correlating the technology side of products. I love the categories, by the way. And I think for our working group, with so much IT support and services being purchased, just having that sustainability, whether it's a label in mind, is really, really important. And we were recently at a conference, and there's always this, well, where's the money in this? What is acquisition guidelines? And we're truly trying to help transform and modernize a lot of the thinking that goes into whether you're designing a new system, building a data center, and to use the tools and the things that I saw today. I was writing down a lot, and I'll research some of those. Thanks, Dr. Ruth, for the reference to, and I'm familiar with SF Tool. It's not so much a question, it's just a comment, because there's so much information out there. And you go to sustainability.gov, you see climate adaptation and resilience plans, you see sustainability plans, you see scorecards, and then there's the EPA, and everybody has their own, but there seems to be some kind of dashboard of people reporting in agencies. Can you kind of tie a little bit of that together for me, at least? Because I want to push people not to 5 different websites, but say, every agency's different, yes, but there are metrics, and industry can help with, not only, hey, you can buy products and we make them too. We want to help reach those goals with the agencies. And I'm thinking the agency support staff. Does that make sense? I'm just looking to try to navigate the labyrinth here. So either one of you.
Yeah, I can start, and Jonathan, feel free to chime in. The reporting aspects of sustainable purchasing, I think could be improved upon, hopefully in the future. I think at this time, the only program that people are required to report on how much they bought is the BioPreferred program. Unfortunately, we don't have any tracking of how many products may have been purchased with these private sector standards and eco-labels. So yeah, all those report cards or scorecards on sustainability.gov would not contain that type of information.
Okay, that's actually helpful. What's your take though on that? Are those dashboards helpful, do you feel? I mean, are they, what do you see? To me, that's high level, but now we're in this, I'm seeing material on this presentation, which is amazing. And, we have to study, like we always talk about, do our homework and understand FAR 23 dot whatever, but just the definition of a product and the buzzwords that are out there, I appreciate that. And I counted the 14057, 2206, and the 2022-006 as sort of the, read them again and understand. But we also in our COI, if I may speak for at least myself, we're trying to build a community of folks that, whether you're a technologist or an acquisition official or a CDO or a chief AI officer, like all of this, what we buy to support our various missions across, it starts with a lot of the product and service offering. And I like that those categories are broken down. So I'm going to study those. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And if you would like to advocate for more reporting of these eco-labels, I think we would also appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I will say this. We plan in our working group to kind of raise the bar on climate and footprint and energy, and we got to save, that footprint. But there are things in place, and I think that's where people don't know generally where to start a lot of the time. Industry and government to enforce, but also not just make this about language in the FAR that nobody's read. We're really trying to educate our community. So thank you. You did that today.
Yeah, and as I always like to say, acquisition may not be sexy, but it is the way that we can truly change. We are one of the largest purchasers. We have the ability to change the market, and this is a great way to do that. So for all the federal folks getting on board and understanding, what's required, and, that you have the power to build into your procurements. And then on the industry side, because I've been on both sides, if something is not required, you still can put it in your proposals and highlight the things that you're doing. So even if it's not tracked or reported somewhere, if you're doing it, take credit for that and help change, the market.
Well, I'm going to jump in and agree with the GAO grasshopper there, who was just talking. You're in a grass. But, I had one specific question really popped in mind when you were talking about the conformity reviews. Is I'm thinking about all the greenwashing and all these like fake labels out there. What happens when you do the review and you do realize that something is not substantive and is not a review? what's the process there? Is there a blacklist? Is there a?
Yeah. No blacklist exists. We don't actually publicize who volunteers to be assessed. If they do not pass our assessment process, we do not put them on blast saying that you do not meet our criteria. But that section of our framework, conformity assessment, is a required section now. So if a label is not able to demonstrate that they have a third-party conformity assessment program, they will not be able to be added to our list. And we even went back to the eco labels that we were already recommending and let them know this is now an absolute requirement. We need to, get rid of this greenwashing in the marketplace, and having them have a conformity assessment program is one really great way to help with that.
Great, thanks.
If I can add to that, I think just to combine the two questions that were just asked right there, I think that as I forget exactly, I think it might have been Vera who said it, but procurement ain't sexy, but it's got teeth. And so to be able to include a requirement that very, very clearly states that this is something you must do is really important, because there are cascading levels of implementation. And at the very beginning, at the very minimum, you need to have that requirement in place through, granted, sometimes Byzantine FAR language, but that then leads to the ability to encourage and to help people to do what they should be doing anyway in a very clear way. And then when you throw in the fact that it's a confusing marketplace, the EPA recommendations has recognized that issue and has done a lot, as you were just saying in that second set of questions, to help people not have to muddle through all the noise. So now there's a requirement in place, and there's clear guidance as to you're going to do the right thing if you do this. So I think that they really do fit into each other.
Yeah, Jonathan, I want to amplify that. I think one of the big changes, right, to the FAR through this update is that affirmative posture from the requiring activity to identify, right, what sustainable products and services, including the purchasing program, the type of product and service, are applicable to the acquisition, right, in the requirements. I think that's a key substantive change, right? Versus, prior to the FAR update that took effect May 22nd of this year, there was a clause. And whether or not people complied with the companies, I should say, complied with the clause was sometimes accounted for and other times not, right? It was much more reactive on the government's part than proactive. And industry was often, given either more flexibility in executing that or lack of clarity, which didn't help in either sense, right? The government meet these stated goals and objectives. And so to have that change in the regulation, I think, is going to be a key driver forward of more proactive partnership and clarity on the part of government to explain our requirements and industry to comply. So to me, that's a big differentiator in the updates.
Absolutely. It is now our default position. Absolutely.
Holly, I think you have some questions in the chat as well. You have one from Andrea Baumholt.
Very much for catching that. Let's see, I'm going back up here. Andrea's question here, Jonathan and Jenna, are you tracking the life cycle emissions associated with products or services, or is that planned?
No, we're not able to track it like that. The way it's addressed is many of the standards we're recommending contain criteria to encourage products be made with less greenhouse gas emissions across the life cycle, but there's no way for us to track that or know across the life cycle how much each product is reducing emissions.
If I can add to that, we certainly are not able to do that, broadly speaking, but in instances in which perhaps an eco-label has a calculator, you could perhaps deduce, you could know that if it existed. For instance, I know the EPEAT has an EP benefits calculator, which can help you understand how much you reduced GHG emissions by across the full life cycle, how much money you saved, how much water you did not use across that full life cycle. So it's a really, really sophisticated tool. I wish it existed for every product, because it really just drives home the why of why you should be doing this. So I want more of that.
And I will put in the chat here just our current federal acquisition regulation requirements related to greenhouse gas disclosure requirements that are currently stand. There is a open or pending FAR case related to different reporting requirements, but that is pending and future uncertain. So I'll share what the requirements are today in the chat. Thank you very much. Great question. Tiffany has a question here for everyone, for y'all. What opportunities outside of the shared frameworks exist for vendors to engage early in the procurement process to better align proposals with EPA priorities and long-term strategies? I'll let you guys take a crack at that, but I'm also happy to share some thoughts there, not necessarily per EPA, but more broadly.
Yeah, I don't think Jonathan and I can answer that question. Actually, once we develop these recommendations, it's kind of gets passed off to the procurement agencies or the contracting officers within the agencies. So yeah, I'm not sure I have any great advice for how to engage earlier. Do you, Jonathan?
Earlier, no. I think that the key moment is to be cognizant of the requirements that might pop up in a solicitation, and to participate in industry days where you have an opportunity to communicate with the contracting stakeholders across the board. And when it's a two-way communicative street. One, you're going to learn about the requirements that we're looking for, but also it's a great opportunity for a vendor to share what they can do. Because, I certainly, as someone who works at EPA, we're always looking for interesting ways to enhance and advocate for sustainability, through our contracts. So.
And I'll just add, certainly every acquisition that's, procurement and solicitation that's out there has different, teams have different models of early engagement, pre-solicitation activities like RFIs and or industry days. And certainly, the language that will be shaped in the requirements around these new FAR requirements and programs and frameworks will be now shared, right, in the solicitation once it's released. But, more broadly at an agency level, my recommendation is to become familiar with the agency sustainability or climate change plans, right? That'll give you kind of a broad lens on, as a federal agency, what the priorities and strategies and areas of focus are. That won't be comprehensive or all-inclusive of what you'll see at the solicitation or procurement level, but at least it would guide early engagement as our private sector partners with agencies and programs around our sustainability or climate change plans. Welcome thoughts from the collective on that as well.
I did want to just add that this issue is actually one of the things that made us want to form this COI, right? We see the 2050 net zero emission procurement goal, but really, how are we going to implement that, right? As Polly knows, the average contracting officer is not going to run out and get their degree in environmental engineering so that they can review, the life cycle sustainability plans and reports that contractors are submitting. So, it would behoove us all to work together to find consistent ways to do the reporting and the emissions reductions and require industry to submit their plans and their proposals in ways that are realistic and implementable, and that can be audited and confirmed, and also that are going to be consistent and fair across the community, so everything doesn't get held up in a bunch of like protests and attacks on the FAR and yada yada. So there's a lot of reason for us to come together and put our collective minds together to think through these issues. From what I can tell me if I'm missing something, there's not really a statutory purchasing preference program that addresses carbon emissions yet, right? Or that specifically gets to that standard. So this is still going to be in development, right?
Yeah.
you want to take
yeah.
Jenna?
Go ahead,
Um,
Jonathan.
Yeah,
Oh, sure.
many of the multi-attribute standards that we recommend do address carbon emissions. But yeah, that's why we're trying to develop more filters like that. So you don't have to go read every single one of these standards. You could just click on a filter for carbon emissions and see exactly how those standards are addressing those issues. Other than that, no, there is no like statutory program that is a single attribute labeled just for carbon emissions. No, that does not exist.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue in some cases, energy efficiency programs get you there, at least to a very large degree. So I think that it's definitely covered, but maybe not from that angle. So it's, but certainly Energy Star FM, things like that can help you identify products that are going to emit fewer GHG emissions.
And
Yeah.
maybe I can kind of tie this one up a little bit too, having been on both sides of the fence. Before you get to that procurement sensitive stage, if you're following or tracking a procurement opportunity at an agency, engage, go to the industry days, reach out when you're able to, and bring up these things. As Polly mentioned, all the COs are not going to be able to get up to speed on all of this. But if you come and you ask a question, then perhaps, some of the aspects may get, brought into that procurement. So, we're all busy and everybody's working on trying to get their work done. It doesn't hurt to bring up topics in the pre-procurement process if you're on the industry side. So hopefully, Tiffany, that all of this great discussion, helps with that. We're all in it together, right? We're trying to educate one another. And as Amy put so well, that was one of the critical reasons that we came together, was to help people get educated, because, we don't all have time to do this in our day jobs. And in this safe space of industry and gov working together, we can share the knowledge and help educate ourselves, educate our organizations, and educate more folks.
And I think that your contracting officers will probably always have a receptive ear, but perhaps more so now, thank you to these new revisions to the FAR, since these requirements are now pretty explicit, and it is the default position of the federal government that we're going to try to find products that at minimum are going to comply with any of those statutory or EPA preferred purchasing programs that we talked about, oftentimes meeting any number of environmental priorities. So you may have an even more interested contracting officer now that it was always something that they had to pursue, but now it's even more emphasized.
Definitively the proactive posture versus reactive compliance focused clause, I think, is going to make a big difference. And, I know within DHS, we've already, updated our, FAR supplement. We've already updated our sustainability guidance to our contracting officers related to the new FAR requirements. And so we're pushing information out. As you guys know, lots of information gets pushed out. So it can't be just information out, but support and coaching and working across the team. So the more people, that come and get information and get trained up on what's new and informed up on what's new, the more these conversations can begin to shape and take place, and industry awareness to guide conversations with programs and contracting officers, and the joint awareness from contracting and programs to make sure that we are asking these questions as we build our solicitations. And ideally, engaging with industry in advance to shape that art of the possible within that constraint of maximum extent practical will help us continue to meet these goals and objectives. So just alibi, if there's any final thoughts, Jonathan or Jenna, that you'd like to make, because I do want to be mindful of everyone's time and we are coming up to it.
No, this is a really great conversation. I agree with everything that was said. And going back to that first point about tracking, I do feel that really, once people can see what it is, once you can track the amount of sustainable products or services that you're purchasing, all kinds of knock-on effects in terms of accountability and understanding why and motivating and incentivizing come into play. So I'll add my 2 cents that is definitely an area that's important towards achieving all of these goals. An important component.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not, Jenna, you mentioned, right, we're certainly not holistic on all of the data collection at this point, but, for the data geeks, and I'm one of them in the audience, FPDS-NG does actually capture a lot, at least some. I'll say some. I'm not going to say a lot. Some of the data that we've discussed today, whether or not the procurement leveraged energy efficiency products, et cetera, or required them, I should say. So if you really wanted to get under the hood, I'll throw the data dictionary for FPDS-NG out there so that you guys can see kind of what we are capturing at the federal level versus what isn't yet captured. I think there's a lot more work we can do in that area to really understand what is happening at that procurement level and build out. With that, Amy, I will turn it over to you if you'd like to close us out. But I just want to say on behalf of the COI, I'd like to first thank Jenna, you and Jonathan for taking time out of what I know is a busy day to help share with our community, and to all of you who joined us today. Likewise, taking time out of your day to come and be part of our community and engage with us today. Thank you. Amy, over to you to close out.
Agreed. Thank you to our speakers. This has been a really important piece of information you all are sharing. I mean, really core and critical. So thank you for the work you're doing. And thank you to Polly and Gisa for hosting you all, finding you all and getting you set up. And we're looking forward to reviewing your presentation, which Polly put in the chat for people that are still interested. And we hope that you will join us at future Climate COI meetings now, Jonathan and Jenna, and provide your wisdom to some of our future discussions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All.
Thank
Have a great
you.
rest of the
Bye.
day.
Have a great week. Bye.